Whew. Wind's picking up out there. But that's okay, because we've got some great tales for some great writers to go over today on Comfy Horror. With me, Dr. Plague. Let's get these stories going, and let's meet some great writers that I'm sure you already know very well. First off, we're going to listen to a little story called Don't Feed the Cats, brought to us by Flamel 777. I do hope you enjoy. For context, my mom has always been a little crazy. Never drowned me in the bathtub crazy, just a little off. Like sometimes she was living in a different world than the rest of us. Like when she looked at you, she knew in her heart that you were less real than her. I remember being really little and walking into her room to find her crying over a heap of her clothes on the ground. She had scissors in her hand, and she was cutting out every spot of purple she found. "I can't see it anymore, Cassie," she said through the sobs. "I can't see the colors I'm supposed to see anymore." I went and hid in my room after that. When my dad came home, he found me locked in my room and asked me what was wrong. I explained what had happened with Mom, and he just sighed and went to talk to her. What I couldn't explain was that I hadn't locked the door because I was afraid of her. I had locked it because it felt like an added barrier between myself and the reality that my mother wasn't okay. When they divorced, I don't remember any particular incident that broke the camel's back. It felt more like an inevitable conclusion that we had all accepted for years by the time it finally happened. What I do remember is listening to my dad read off a list of the big crazy moments from their marriage. Some of them were a surprise to me, like him coming home to find her hiding in a closet with a knife. Most of them, though, I remembered all too well. So when the judge looked at me and asked if what my father was saying was true, it was all I could do to nod back at her. Needless to say, my dad got custody of me. Even at 12, I knew that, regardless of his case, there had still been a chance of things not going his way. Afterwards, we went to Sullivan's and ate our weight in ice cream sundaes. I knew that it wasn't easy for him to raise me alone, but I also know that he was doing his best. My father was a 46-year-old middleware technician when he chose to become a single parent. He worked long hours for little pay, but still found time to tutor me in math and come to my track meets. He was patient. He was gentle. He was my hero. But all of that is just a lead-up to my story, right? It turned out that a few months ago, my mom got in contact with my dad. She said that she was getting treatment, that she wanted to make reparations. She gave him the number of her psychiatrist, who my dad promptly called. The man on the other end of the line assured my dad that his ex-wife wasn't the same person from 4 years prior. He said that she had changed and that she was getting better. He promised that getting closure with my dad and me was vital to her healing. At first, Dad refused. He was convinced that no amount of medication or therapy would change the woman who had haunted him and his daughter all those years. Eventually, though, he met her. He says it was just to get her off his back, to put the final nail in the coffin. Instead, he realized that she really was acting different, more lucid, more stable. They met a few more times, and with each meeting he became more and more convinced that she had gotten better, that this time it would be different. When he walked into the house after seeing her, I couldn't tell what he was feeling. It felt like some kind of exhausted hope, the kind that shouldn't still have a pulse, kind of undead yearning. He needed help. I'd known that for years. He was working himself to the bone trying to take care of both of us. When I'd been born, my dad had signed up to be a part-time team member. Now it was just him and the growing shadows under his eyes. When he gently asked if I wanted to see Mom again, I nodded enthusiastically. Not for her or me, but for him. It is so good to see you, sweetheart. Those were the first words she said to me when she sat down across from me at McDonald's. I can't begin to apologize for everything I must have put you through. She looked better. I think after all those years, my memories of the way she acted and the way she made me feel had blended together into a flat nightmare. The woman squeezing my hand wasn't scary. It even felt appropriately motherly, though it made my skin itch. We met occasionally for months. We were alone once or twice when my dad had to step out for a work call. When we were, she would tell me about her group therapy, about all the friends she was making. She told me that it took her so long to realize that her biggest problem was self-isolating. It drove me crazy, being alone, she said, but it's okay now. Now I'm not alone. Eventually, my mom asked Dad if I could stay with her overnight. He was clearly uncomfortable with the idea and told her that he'd have to think it over. All I could think about was the work retreat, the trips with friends, all the times that my dad had missed out on living his life to take care of me. All for me. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I got to a place where my mom could take on even a little bit of the burden, that he might have his life back. So I told him that I wanted to go. I begged him to let me stay with her. Eventually, he agreed. "I'll be here to pick you up at 7, he said, as he pulled my suitcase out of the car. He'd picked me up from track and drove me straight to the cramped apartment building where my mom lived. "On the dot. If you need me before, promise me that you'll call, okay?" I promised him, offering a pinky when he gave me a stern look. He locked it with mine and took a deep breath. "Your mother's trying," he said. "I can appreciate that. I can even respect it. But I will drive my car through her front door if it means protecting you. Understand?" I laughed at the image of his scuffed Nissan hatchback smashing through the bricks and the drywall. I squeezed his hand. The evening was fine to start with. Her 2-bedroom apartment was neat and tidy, if a little small. It had a smell, too, like the ghost of something rotten hiding in the walls. But she let me put whatever I wanted on the TV. She even brought popcorn and soda for us to eat on the couch while we watched a police procedural. When I heard the oven timer ding, I asked her what she was making, and she stood up to go check on it. "It's your favorite, honey. Tuna mac." I felt the heat drain out of my face just a little. Tuna mac wasn't my favorite. I don't think I'd ever eaten it before that night. But I told myself to shrug it off. It had been years, hadn't it? It was all right for her to have a little misplaced memory. That alone didn't mean that anything was wrong. The phone buzzed with a text from my dad. "All good?" he asked. "You're such a worrywart," I responded, after giving his question a thumbs up. We ate at the table as the procedural show wrapped up. I felt like we should be talking, sharing, but there wasn't much to say, really. The absence of conversation stretched between us like a tightrope, but we didn't dare step onto it. As I scraped the last bit of tuna mac from my bowl into the trash, Mom told me that she had picked out a movie she thought we'd like. I agreed to it and sat on the couch as she put the disc in. It was a strange movie. Scary, but not in the way that a horror movie is scary. In the way that a nightmare is scary. Like everyone around you knows something that you don't. It followed a woman with amnesia trying to understand what had happened to her. At a certain point, I got a little too weirded out. The strange dream logic of the movie was like a headache I couldn't shake. I pulled out my phone and started to scroll through social media, trying to do so in a way that Mom wouldn't noticed. I shouldn't have worried. She was so enthralled by the movie that she was leaning expectantly forward, her eyes full of excitement and hunger. Just over halfway through, however, she suddenly grabbed my knee with an intensity that made me jump. I looked up at her to find that she was still looking just as intently at the TV. "Watch this. This part's my favorite," she said. I looked up at the screen to find the main character holding each other in bed. the sexual tension escalating rapidly. I felt my cheeks flush. I know how it feels to see a sex scene with your parents in the room, but this one was different. My dad always got a little uncomfortable in a way that made my discomfort feel more normal. He would usually fumble with the remote as he tried to skip through. With him, it was something to laugh about, a running joke between us. My mother's fingers digging into my skin as she commanded me to watch these two women going down on each other felt wrong, though. She shouldn't be touching me, shouldn't be encouraging me to watch. She shouldn't have that wild hunger in her eyes. I knew in my head that my mother had never been violent, had never tried to hurt me. But with her one hand on my knee, I couldn't help imagining the other one holding a knife behind her back. I felt like I was going to throw up, my throat quickly closing. I don't want to watch this, I finally blurted out. I don't think the words were even all the way out of my mouth before the TV flashed to darkness. The remote was already in her hand, like she'd been waiting for me to say something. Okay, honey, I've got the spare room all made up for you, but before we call it a night, I need to feed my friend's cats. Can you come with me? I wouldn't feel right, leaving you all alone. She held her hand out, beckoningly to me. The hunger was gone from her eyes, leaving just the model calmness she'd had for the last few months. How long will it take? I asked. I'm pretty tired. Oh, just a few minutes. I promise, honey. She looked so sincere that not believing her words would have been like spitting in the face of God. I'd be a bad daughter, a terrible daughter, if I didn't trust her. Of course, I see it now. I see that a person trying to earn back their trust wouldn't act like they had never done anything wrong. A person trying to be better would make allowances for the pain their actions had caused. For her to look at me with the eyes of a mother that had never hurt or scared me should have been the first sign that she was living in a reality different from mine. But I didn't. I couldn't see that then. So I got in the car. My stomach started churning after 15 minutes on the road. I tapped my foot on the interior carpet, feeling the moments of the car trip slip on and on. You said this wouldn't take long, I asked eventually. Oh, silly, she responded. I meant feeding the cats wouldn't take long. No, my friend lives a little bit out of town, but we're almost there. Don't worry. She turned the radio up after that, a pop station that kept fading in and out of static. I could feel my body trying to take a quicker, faster breath, and I tried to wrestle my panic away. I tried sending my dad a quick checking-in text as we turned off the highway, but the phone buzzed a moment later to tell me the text could not be sent. By the time we pulled into the snaking gravel driveway, we'd been driving for about 45 minutes, and the radio was a hornet's nest of static. To call the place a house was generous. It was a cabin nestled in some deep woods on the outskirts of town, the kind where you can just tell that the owner declined electricity and running water for the sake of independence. Oh, sweetie, they're just gonna love you, Mom said as she turned the car off and dropped the keys into the cup holder. Then she got out and closed the door. The cats? I asked, the still warm interior of the car. The inside of the cabin was no better than the outside. When I walked in, my mom was already holding a long neck lighter to a lantern, casting a dim and gloomy light around the place. The rug on the hardwood floor was moth-eaten and ragged. The rotten coffee table looked like it was ready to fall any second. The old couch was gray and muted, and I didn't want to find out if that was sun damage or dust. So, your friend lives here? I asked slowly. I gotta go get some food from the shed, she called cheerily back at me, not answering the question as she stepped out the back screen door. I looked around me. No bowls or cat food, no scratching posts, not even any claw damage on the old couch. In that moment, standing in the dim light of the strange place, an unwelcome thought popped into my head. The storybook image of Hansel and Gretel being led into the woods by their father so that he could abandon them. She's not going to leave me here, I told myself. That would be crazy. The memory of her cutting the purple from her clothes was my only rebuttal. I listened closely to the silence of the night, sure that I would hear the sounds of feet on gravel, the sound of the engine turning over. Instead, through the overwhelming silence, I heard a shuffle, the creak of a board, the sound of someone trying to stay still, trying not to be perceived. Did she double back? Is she going to try to scare me? Why would she do that? I jumped when the screen door slammed open, admitting my mother and a 25-pound bag of dry cat food. "Hungry cats," I muttered. "Cats?" she asked. I saw such genuine confusion on her face that it made my eyes well up with tears. "The cats, that's what we're here to feed, right?" I said in a small voice. "Oh, hungry cats," she laughed. "Sorry, I misheard you. Yes, very hungry cats. Hungrier than you think." I helped her move the bag to the porch, where she flashed the screen of her phone around until she found a grimy dog food bowl tucked beneath the rotten benches. "There we are," she said. She haphazardly tore the bag open and spilled the kibble into the dusty bowl. "So, we can go now?" I asked. "No, sweetie," she said, turning to me with confusion. "We have to wait until the cats come to eat. Don't you know anything?" "Oh, okay," I said, my body beginning to shift and tighten in a way I'd consciously forgotten. The knowledge that the person in front of me was not living in the same reality as me shot through me like pain. The awareness that the wrong word would have my mother ripping my throat out with her teeth shook me. "So, what's your friend's name?" I asked. "What do you mean?" Her eyes were no longer on me. They were on the tree line, tracing the shadows between the trunks. "Your friend, the one who owns the house." "Yes, it's his house. He doesn't come by much anymore, but he told me I was free to visit whenever I wanted. I just had to feed the cats when I did." She turned to look at me, but I knew that she wasn't seeing her daughter. Her eyes drifted around me like she was evaluating a statue or a cut of meat. I looked away from her instinctively. I traced the same trees with my eyes, knowing that her unrelenting stare was on me all the while. Out of the corner of my eye, however, I caught movement. I concentrated on it. Without looking, I realized that I was seeing the shed where the food had been. The roof had caved in, like the victim of a violent crime. The door was hanging off its hinges. And there, poking out from behind the rotten mass of the shed, was a figure, a gray form against the shadowed backdrop of the woods. It loomed from the darkness like something was curious. "I know we might be here a while, waiting," my mom said, her eyes still on me. "Why don't you go lay down inside? I don't want you telling your father I kept you up all night." "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding 1,000 miles away. I felt like I was swimming through glass, slow and morbid. "Why don't I go lay down in the car? That way when we leave, you won't have to wake me up." "No," her voice was stern now, harsh. "You'll hurt your back in the car, Casey. Lie down on the couch." "But you're my daughter," she shouted, her voice rising in the night air. "When I tell you to go to sleep, you'll go to sleep, goddammit. Do you understand?" I felt my breath grow ragged, felt the tears falling, but I was no longer in my body. I was made of clay, soft and moldable, easy to smash and put away when you're done with it. My mom's arms were around me in an instant. "It's okay, honey. Mommy's here," she said, like she hadn't been the one to shout at me, even as she led me into the abandoned cabin. "Mommy's gonna make it better. You just need to lie down, all right?" She laid me on the dusty couch and patted my cheek with one hand. Then she walked through the door onto the porch and into the grass. "Here, kitty, 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 kitty," she began to coo. "Kitty, kitty, kitty, kitty." I needed to get up. I needed to run. I needed to get to the car, but my limbs felt heavy and weak, like all it took was having my mother yell at me for my childhood fears to fall over me like chains. I tried to slow my breathing to regain control of my body. I heard my mother's voice grow fainter and fainter. Was she walking away from the cabin? Was she walking into the woods? That's when I noticed the other sounds. Not the shuffling from before, not the sound of hiding. The sounds of walking, of careful, measured steps. I heard the boards creak in uneven rhythms, like something was slowly dancing, but it was all wrong. I heard the dry rasp of nails on peeling wallpaper. I heard laughter that sounded wet and dry at the same time. Something began moving against the back of the couch, and I stared with half-closed eyes as its shadow fell on the wall. In the outline cast by the dim little lantern, I saw something clamber onto the back of the couch. It perched like a gargoyle, but I could see that it was massive, the size of a man, balanced precariously on the wooden piece of furniture that groaned in protest. The thing above me emitted a low growl, like the rumble of a distant earthquake. I felt a heavy wetness hit my shoulder, and it began to run down my limp arm. I stayed still, not by choice, not because I thought it would keep me alive. In that moment, I knew that I was dead, that I would never see my dad again. I knew that I was going to be eaten or murdered or torn apart by whatever was drooling. And since I knew that to be true, I knew that there was no point in running, no point in fighting. It was over. All that was left was to accept that. "There you are, you nasty thing!" My mom's voice cut through the tension like a flashlight through darkness. "Your friends are all out here. Don't worry, you can play with her later after she's had her nap." Through the slits of my eyelids, I watched as the shadow of the figure leapt heavily to the ground. It danced violently into view, spinning in slow, uneven circles before it came to rest on all fours by my mother's feet. It looked mostly human, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the knees bent at impossible angles. As it followed my mom through the door, it looked back at me. Where the eyes should have been were spheres of black glass. The surrounding skin was mottled and scarred in horrible twisting patterns. As it smiled, I saw that where the flat chiclet teeth should have been were instead sharp splinters of bone that seemed to bleed freely, long rivulets of bloody drool spilling onto the hardwood. It cocked its head at me, the black glass looking into my soul. Then it leaned its head back, inhaled long and deep, and followed my mother through the door. "Good kitty," I heard my mother say from the porch. Her voice was drowned out by the sound of dry food being shattered by sharp teeth. The back door, that was all I could think of. That rusted screen door was my only hope of escape. I slid myself off the couch as quietly as possible, my knee landing softly on the tattered rug. I stayed low to the ground and crept around the couch, stepping only on the boards that looked steady. "She'll be so excited to meet you, pretty girl," my mom said, still cooing to the thing on the porch. "And I know you'll be happy to see her, too. I promised you more wet food, didn't I?" Once I reached the screen door, I took a deep breath. The door had been loud when my mom had opened it earlier. Looking at the rusty springs holding the door closed, I could only hope that they had been the source. As I put my hands to the spring, a sound from the porch burrowed into my shaking bones. It was somewhere between a howl and a gasp, the sound of air running over broken windpipes, a song I didn't want to hear. It spoke to a deep, ancient part of my brain. It told me to hide. Shaking worse than ever now, I pulled at the spring just enough to pop it off the screw, holding it to the door. Then, my breath still, I pushed the door open and hoped for the best. It didn't make a sound, at least, not over the yowling on the porch. It swung open in silent invitation to the darkness. All that panic, all that fear wouldn't let me be careful anymore. I could see the nose of the car in the carport, could practically taste the dust covering the tires. I couldn't wait. My feet were quiet as I ran through the grass, but the second I stepped onto the gravel of the carport, the porch singing stopped. "Cassie," my mother called. "Honey, where are you?" In moments of true panic, I've never experienced time moving faster or slower, like people always describe. For me, things just start happening all at once. In my mind, there's no delineation between the moment I pulled the door open, the moment I scrambled for the keys, or the moment I snapped the car into reverse. They all happen simultaneously, like photographs, spinning in open air. As I changed gears to drive, however, I remember my mother standing in front of the car. The headlights played across the fabric of her dress. The dust kicked up by the car obscured her and the half-dozen creatures flanking her on either side. And in her eyes, I saw real hurt, a genuine sense of betrayal. "What are you doing?" I saw her mouth. I didn't answer, in flagrant violation of the 3 months I had before I could drive a car without a guardian present. I tore down the driveway and away from this madness. I took every curve inadvisably fast, feeling the inertia of the car trying to buck me every time. I drove so fast that the cloud of dust behind me quickly obscured the house from view. Good riddance. I was almost to the main road when I caught sight of the thing out of the corner of my eye. It was one of the creatures, the one from inside the house, loping easily alongside my reckless driving. Its glass eyes weren't looking ahead of it, however. They were locked on me, and as it stared me down with its smile, I knew one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. I had only imagined that these things were human, maybe deformed or mutated, but still human. Even driven insane with pain, a human could be reasoned with, empathized with, on some level. But these weren't humans. They had never been humans, not by a long shot. In that smile gleaming with blood, in the contortion of muscles where eyes should have been, I knew that these were something else, some other. That wasn't the shape of a human becoming an alien, but of something alien trying to become human. Only it had gotten the details wrong. I exploded onto the paved road and took off in what direction I thought the highway had been, keeping an eye out for the creature. I saw it pacing along the rooftops, tracking me through the flickering sodium vapor lights. By the time I hit the highway, the thing seemed to be gone, but I couldn't be sure. I think that was when I realized that the tears were shattering on my thighs, that I was gasping in air through sobs. So I drove, not towards home, not towards anywhere in particular. I pushed the speed limit, trying to put as much distance between me and the awful, awful cabin as I could. It wasn't until I felt something buzzing at my feet that I thought about stopping. In the chaos, my phone had fallen to the floor. I grabbed at it and saw that I had a dozen texts from my dad and 20 missed calls. My tears changed then, no longer those of an escapee. They were the tears of someone about to be rescued. I pulled into a rest stop and called him, sniffling. I tried to explain, but before I could, he cut me off and asked where I was. I read him the address of the stop. "Tell me everything," he said. I could hear him getting into his Nissan. So I did. I told him everything. I know that in stories like mine, the teenage daughter always holds back details so she isn't thrown in a mental hospital. But I didn't even think about that. I told my dad about the movie, about the tuna mac, about Mom saying that she just had to go feed some cats. When I told him about seeing the first creature behind the shed, I threw up in the passenger seat. When my dad eventually got to me, I fell into his arms and sobbed and screamed and shook. My father, the middle-aged IT professional with a bad hip, helped me like he had helped me when I was 5. "We're going to call the police," he said, running his hands through my hair. "We're going to tell them the important bits. She took you to a strange place and made you feel afraid, right?" "But how?" I don't think we can explain the other parts, honey, but I don't think it makes much of a difference either way. I nodded. That made sense. We were halfway back home when the weight of the night settled over me, waves of tiredness washing me away to unconsciousness. I looked at the clock and smiled when I woke up. It was 7 a.m. On the dot, I said, starting to drift away. On the dot, kiddo, just like I said. That was a week ago. After we talked to the police, they sent a patrol car up to the cabin for my mom. When they got there, no one was around. All they found was an empty bag of dog food next to a bowl, with my mother's shoes neatly beside it. According to the county records, the cabin's been abandoned for decades. The last owner had died before the turn of the century, and the land deed was split between his children. The police talked to all of them, but none of them have any connections to my mom. They assured us that they're still looking into it, but I'm not holding my breath. Doesn't matter anyway, because we're leaving. The house is already listed. My dad's been doing online interviews for a new job in a new city. He stayed home from work all week, and he called me out of school. We keep the doors locked and the windows drawn. The revolver he normally keeps in a safe is always nearby. As soon as he can lock down a new job, he says we're booking our flights. We're getting the hell out of this town, from my mom and from those monsters. In the meantime, we're sleeping in the family room. I sleep on a pull-out while Dad sleeps in the love seat. He's watching over me. I can't wait to leave, though, because sometimes, as hard as he tries, my hero falls asleep, and sometimes when he does, and I listen really close to the silence, I can hear that awful, awful singing. And every night, it's getting a little bit closer. Whew, not feeding cats is basically a bad word around here. I guess I shouldn't let my furry friends hear anything about that last story. But we're going to go from not feeding cats to not feeding dolls. This next story, brought to us by AP Claret, is called Dolls Don't Eat. So, enjoy. The dispatcher said 2 kids, a boy and a girl, showed up on a lady's doorstep. Lady said the kids wouldn't talk or give their names. She gave them milk and cookies and sent them to rest in her bed because they looked tired. No children had been reported missing, but it was late, so the dispatcher thought the parents probably didn't know their kids were gone. No problem. Not my first call about kids that walked out the front door because they wanted to play. At least it wasn't winter. I drove to the house on the outskirts of Bridal Veil Lake. It looked like another farm sold off for condos that were never built. A bunch of wild fields and dirt surrounded the lady's house. It was remote and dark, and I wondered if she felt comfortable living alone out here. That knock in the middle of the night must have been a shock. I announced my presence and knocked lightly. "Hello?" An old woman, the lady, answered. "Hello?" "Hello, how are you doing tonight, ma'am?" "Been better. They're in the bedroom, sleeping, I think." She stepped inside and let me in. I saw 2 shapes beneath a quilt in the darkened bedroom. "There was no one else? You didn't see anybody?" She shook her head. "Were they injured? Scared?" "No, just shy. Really shy." She nodded towards the kitchen, which I could see from where I stood, not being a big house. "They hardly ate." There were 2 neat piles of chocolate chip cookies beside full cups of milk. It all looked completely untouched. The sight made me antsy. She said they didn't eat much. They ate something, but not a crumb had fallen on the table. Nuh-uh, I have 3 kids of my own. I never saw them leave a cookie intact at all. Something really bad must have happened to those children. "Hey, kids," I said quietly from the doorway of the bedroom. I didn't want to startle them. "You awake?" No answer, but I had to check on them. There was only a lamp for the room, and it barely lit anything. 2 small shapes lay with their bodies and heads covered with the quilt, completely still. "I'm a policeman. I'm here to help you. You don't have to be scared." I waited, but still nothing. "I'm going to pull off the blanket very slowly, just so you can see me, okay? Then you can put it right back if that makes you feel safe." Nothing. They didn't move a muscle. I prepared for the worst and pulled off the quilt. Their eyes were black, shiny, lifeless. Jesus! Because these were not living children, but full-size dolls, complete with clothes and realistic hair. Only the eyes and their plastic faces looked immediately fake. What the hell? I stomped out, admittedly pissed. The lady waited in her living room chair. "Is this a joke?" "Excuse me?" "Those aren't real kids. They're dolls," I said. She seemed confused. "I beg your pardon?" I took a breath and tried to calm myself. "Ma'am, are you on medication or—" "Jesus Christ, save us!" She got up and went to the bedroom. I shouldn't have let her see. The lady fainted at the foot of the bed. I called it in, and everybody had a good laugh about the dolls. Except for me. The lady had been prescribed blood thinners and a nasal spray for seasonal allergies. Unless she did other non-prescribed drugs, she had nothing hallucinogenic in her system. That meant she probably had a tumor or dementia or something. Gas leak could have also been a possibility. I mulled over those details while I escorted the ambulance to the hospital. She wasn't conscious for long, but didn't fight my suggestions to see a doctor. "Thank you," she said from the stretcher, squeezing my hand just before the paramedics wheeled her into the ER. I nodded. I didn't know what to say, but it was my job to help. I followed them in. Sometimes doctors want to ask questions. The cafeteria called to me. 4 more hours till the end of my shift. Coffee and a sandwich seemed prudent. I hardly touched them. The walkie crackled. There had been an assault at the hospital. Obviously, I responded. "Someone's been attacked," dispatch said. "The nurse that called wasn't very clear, and she hung up." I got up from the table about the same time a doctor descended the steps into the food court and shouted something incomprehensible. When he got close, I grabbed him by the shoulders. "She's dead. Gone. He killed her," the doctor said. It took a bit for me to understand. I'll summarize. The old lady I'd escorted to the hospital had been murdered by another patient. A young man suffering from unmedicated schizophrenia. He'd been brought into the ER after being hit by a car. "I thought he was sleeping," the doc had told me. He sat on the floor with his head in his hands. "Oh God, her head. He damn near cut her head off." Apparently, he walked down the hallway with it. Then he sat down and chatted with staff until the police arrived. I never left the food court, so I was spared the scene. Still messed me up. She thanked me. I'd sent her to her grisly death. A tragedy. That's what everyone, including my therapist, said, and I eventually agreed. I believed it. For years, I didn't think about those dolls unless someone brought them up. The old woman had been suffering some kind of delusion. No point in finding out what exactly. Probably wasn't even possible. Then, I got another call. "What? What did you just say?" The dispatcher didn't know about the kids and the dolls. That was half a decade ago at this point. "Can you hear me?" "Yes. North side. Gentleman says 2 kids showed up on his doorstep. No missing children reported tonight." "A boy and a girl? The kids?" I asked. "Yeah, how'd you know?" I didn't explain. "I'm on it, but send more constables, please." So many similarities to the previous tragedy. The time of year, the wrong side of midnight, the kids gaining entry to the home. Except that hadn't happened last time. They were dolls, I reminded myself. I would have to go to the house in the posh side of town and find actual kids there. Then I'd do my job and get them home. Fear against resolve, I gripped the steering wheel too tight and my fingers went numb. Big, dead hot dog fingers trembled when I got out of the cruiser in the huge driveway. No lights were on in the mansion at the top of the hill. I'd hoped the other constables would have arrived, but I was alone again. It took me a few minutes to calm down and not call dispatch for an ETA. As I approached, I could see the front door had been left slightly open. My flashlight revealed a big foyer, enough to fit a house. Since there hadn't been a crime reported, I felt confident to call out to the owner. "Hello?" An echo replied. The place really was that big. "Bridal Veil Lake PD. Your front door's open, sir." I rang the doorbell and waited a bit, but nobody showed. I don't know why I didn't call dispatch or wait for another constable. The only reason I went in, I think, was because I had to know if history would repeat itself. "I'm coming in." Switches were dead. No power. The grand staircase wrapped the foyer in a broad embrace, and in the center, they were there, propped up beside a headless storyteller. At first I didn't understand, and I tried talking. "It's going to be okay," I said to the headless man. He'd been posed with an oversized Grimm's fairy tale book between his thighs and arms. Before each of the black-eyed dolls, set up to appear as attentive children, a tall glass of milk and a bowl of chips had been placed and left untouched. I choked out a gasp, but it couldn't be. It couldn't be. How could the dolls be here? Attempts to draw my firearm and use my radio went about as well as you can imagine. The gun hit the marble floor, and I communicated nothing of use to dispatch. Maybe that was good. I might have shot the other constables when they showed up. They found me on my knees and hysterical. I kept pointing at the dolls. They thought I meant the headless victim. "It's going to be okay," one of them said, and it felt like I'd said it, or this constable had been cloned from my cells. Funny the place as a shattered mind wonders. "Okay?" I asked. "I don't remember much about that. I went to the hospital. They had to sedate me. I wouldn't stop talking about the dolls. Olive and Matthew," my therapist said. He'd come to visit and explained what had happened. "It's a terrible coincidence," he said. "Those dolls are the same, yes, from the last incident. Apparently they didn't belong to the woman who passed." I don't know why this information horrified me. Well, who the hell do they belong to?" I shouted. "It's all right," he said. It's not entirely what you think." He really pissed me off. "Look, just explain it then." The dolls weren't known to the relatives. They claimed the old lady who had been decapitated didn't like dolls of any kind. She found them creepy. Your colleagues put them into evidence for lack of a better option. Then they were sold at auction. And the rich guy bought them. No, but somebody did. And that person, well, they're the killer, I'm afraid. A man was discovered in the mansion basement, covered in blood, with the head of the owner. I thought you said it'd be all right. The man was mentally ill, but he bought those dolls. Maybe he even called about the kids. Do you see what I'm saying? Some kind of copycat killer? He shrugged, his bony shoulders in the tweed coat. It's the only thing that makes sense. Perhaps he knew the other schizophrenic man that killed the woman who thanked me. The important thing to note is that nothing supernatural is occurring. The therapist smiled. What? It's an unfortunate coincidence. I mean, that bullshit smile twitched. I've been around long enough to know when someone's pulling a con. I never thought it was supernatural. Why did you say that? I asked. He chuckled nervously. An unfortunate choice of words. I didn't mean to imply that. How do you know the names? The names? Of the dolls, I said, before attempting to get out of the hospital bed. Handcuffs held my wrists. The sedatives had prevented this observation until the urge to punch the therapist moved my body. What the hell is going on? Why are you telling me this? You're not from the department. What is happening? He backed away towards the door. Calm down. The killer named them. He kept saying the names over and over. The inspector contacted me. She thought it best I talk to you. I agreed, and bullshit! He suddenly went mute, his lips mouthing the words, "Help me," over and over. His eyes darted to the little window in the door at the same time a shadow passed across his face. The therapist shivered and sniffled back a tear. "You should run," he said, his last words. All at once, the man collapsed. "What the... Help! Help!" I shouted. The nurse came in and did their thing, but he was gone. I asked him if he was gone. They stopped trying to revive him, one of them confirming his death. How had he died? A real tragedy, another unfortunate coincidence. The deceased therapist had an unknown aneurysm that just happened to trigger while he begged for help and a shadow crossed the window. It was all bullshit. I took his advice. After my wife picked me up from the hospital, I told her I'd taken early retirement. She looked relieved until I told her we needed to leave Bridal Veil Lake. I purchased a cottage up north on the Oxbow Lake. My family didn't come. Who could blame them? I didn't think they were in danger until I learned everybody is, and there are no safe places. They came on the third night. At first, the knocking struck too softly. I thought I'd imagined it. Then it became more persistent, more rapid. I didn't move from the recliner or even lower the footrest. I just watched the door and did my best not to breathe too loudly. The knocking continued with desperate urgency. Then tiny fingernails scratched at the door. Soft weeping followed that. A child for sure. I could no longer be idle. I went to the window and peeked through the curtain. The expected pair, Olive and Matthew, wept in the gloom on the stoop. They weren't dolls this time. They were kids, flesh and blood, and human. I relented and opened the door. The very image of the dolls looked up to me. Misery and fatigue had captured the innocence from their face. I know what an overtired child looks like. This wasn't that. The little boy and girl hadn't rested in days. They swayed on their feet, avoiding collapse by way of fear or something greater. I just didn't know that yet. I'm not crazy. I don't believe in ghosts or whatever this was supposed to be. I hadn't been drinking anything but pop, and there was no gas leak in the cottage or monoxide detectors would be going off. The kids were real, and they were scared. But so was I. I grabbed their arms and basically tossed them behind me and into the living room. It was dark on Oxbow Lake with a million places to hide. I shut the door and threw the bolt. Olive and Matthew clutched one another by the recliner. "What's going on? Who are you? How did you get here?" They stared, but not at me or anything. Both were underweight and filthy, a combination of urine and stale sweat emanating from their simple clothes. "Go to the couch and lie down," I said, completely aware of the pattern I was fulfilling. I went to the kitchen and grabbed some apples and cheese. I set it down on the coffee table. "Eat," I said. Neither would look at the food. "Eat," I said louder. They had to eat. It felt crucial. If they ate, then they were real, because the food would be gone, and it seemed like tangible proof of our existence. Olive yawned. Matthew's expression contorted with scorn, while his bottom lip trembled. He seemed angry with her. She looked ashamed. Both started to cry again. "What the hell happened to you?" I dialed 911 and went through the process of summoning the police. The dispatcher thought I was crazy when I demanded a severe response. "You'll be lucky to see a constable within an hour, sir," she said. "You're so far away." I couldn't argue with that, but I tried anyway. I'll be dead before that. Something isn't right. I told her about the dolls and my time with the BVLP. She listened intently because that's what she was trained to do. Talking was good. Talking meant life and focus off of whatever she might believe I could be capable of. The call hadn't gone well. In other words, I'd simply cast myself as crazy, a possibly dangerous suspect. I hung up. Maybe they'd get here fast because of the kids. Maybe I'd be beheaded long before a hope of rescue. The kids leaned into the cushions, closed their eyes, and immediately fell asleep. No bites had been taken of the food. I got my gun from the bedroom. When I returned, the dolls were beside them. All 4 kids could be mistaken for sleeping children. A tall, disheveled man stood by the peeled screen of the open door. Only his fingernails, bitten and jagged, caught the edge of the lamplight. Shadowed lips muttered gibberish at first, but then his words became clear. "Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat. Dolls don't eat." I aimed. He lunged, and I fired. He staggered, but not before wrapping his large hand around the barrel of the gun. I put another bullet through him, yet he didn't fall. With surprising strength, he smacked me across the face, and I dropped the gun. He retrieved it, and somehow our positions in the living room were reversed. He stood near the couch. The real kids had run away. Only their simulacrums remained. I stood near the expertly sliced screen of the front door. The man's narrow head resembled a crescent moon. He appeared confused by the blood exiting his body as he struggled to level the gun. I wasn't about to wait around for him to figure it out. I leapt through the open window as a bullet shattered the glass above my head. My ass hit the dirt, and I tore off up the pitch of the forest, figuring I'd hide somewhere until the police arrived. For a while that worked. I lay in the midst of some thorny brush, scratching myself up good, until time enough said the man had to be dead from blood loss. I endured the escape from the brambles, crawling until something firm pressed between my shoulder blades. "There you are," said a voice, impossibly calm and smooth. "Don't move. I have you. The blade is sharp, and I've done this before." I did as he said, and remained as still as my fear would allow. "Of course, you understand something about it now." When I remained silent, he ordered me to answer, punctuating the request with the tip of his knife. "You make them knock on the door in the night. They're supposed to be like dolls, and if they're not, then the kind caretakers have to die. Olive and Matthew must become the same as their dolls. Exactly the same." "Why?" The knife point penetrated slightly. "That's not for you to know. We're only here because of bad luck. You happened upon 2 instances of the training. They were so little that first time. They're older now, but they don't look it. We don't let them grow much." "You cut off that woman's head in the hospital," I accused. The knife pressure relaxed a little. "Perhaps I was wrong, and you don't get it." But then I did, and resumed tension forced me to reveal everything. "You didn't kill that woman. You didn't kill the rich guy. And you aren't going to kill me." The moon-faced guy had been a ringer for the murderer, just like the other 2. Where did he find so many mentally ill people to take the fall? He'd need access. He'd have to be a doctor of some kind. Or a therapist. "You're alive, so you didn't die in the hospital. No aneurysm. How's that possible? The nurses..." The therapist laughed. "Elementary, my dear Watson. I made up a story for the nurses. I told them you were dangerous and obsessed with me. I needed to cut contact with you, and, while certainly dramatic, they were all too willing to help out a colleague. You wanted me to go far away.
I hoped you would, but never thought you'd be so dense as to choose yet another perfectly isolated location for me to work. You would have been much safer in your home."
I was too scared to feel stupid.
"Now, we're going back to see Olive and Matthew. My poor slave is likely dead, so it's my turn to cut, and that's fine. I'm out of practice, and there's no need to rush."
"Why let the victims contact the police?"
"The children have to see that no one can help them. They're mine. Makes it more fun, too."
"But why the dolls? You're leaving a trail."
He snickered. "Less than breadcrumbs. Only you've connected 2 of the scenes, and I've left dozens over the years. Granted, the last one was dramatic. I couldn't help myself. I wanted Olive and Matthew to see what happened to good people when they disappoint me."
I thought of Olive's yawn, and how hungry they must always be. One of them ate. The knife pierced my skin, and I gasped and writhed.
"Dolls don't eat. Now get up, into the house, and..."
The distant thrum of an engine filled the otherwise perfect quiet of the night. Noise travels easily across the water, so we waited and listened. When it became clear that a vehicle was approaching, he drew in a sharp breath and exhaled slowly, calming himself.
"Well, someone's coming. It happens."
"You gonna kill me?" The pressure of the knife tip evaporated like the presence of the psychotic therapist. I leapt to my feet and threw a wild punch into the dark. Nothing but air swept over my knuckles.
"Coward."
"I won't keep quiet. I'm not afraid." I lied badly. "I'll find you. I'll find those kids. You hear me? I'm coming. Olive, Matthew." He chuckled, already some indeterminable distance away.
"Good luck. Tell anyone you think will care, or will believe you."
Headlights bounced down the narrow dirt road. The front door of the cottage opened and filled with the therapist. I screamed and rushed him and realized my next mistake too late. The man wasn't the therapist, but an off-duty park warden, keenly aware of his surroundings and the clumsy charge of an old wounded cop. He flipped me with some kind of judo. I landed across the coffee table on the untouched food, facing the black-eyed dolls. A pair of cuffs came next. I ranted about the dolls and the therapist and the children, but to no avail. They found the moon-faced martyr crouched by the broken window. Even dead, he still appeared confused. The warden used his cell to call for more support. The dispatcher had only called him because she knew he lived near Oxbow Lake. I told the story so many times and begged them to look for the therapist and those kids. Hours later, someone must have called him because they came back with another unfavorable fabrication. The therapist had never left Bridal Veil Lake and answered the call from Huntsville police on a landline at his office. He must have drove back, I said. But Huntsville and Oxbow Lake are roughly 5 hours away from Bridal Veil Lake. I'd been questioned for 6 hours. He also told us about your condition. I laughed. Sure, of course he did. But what about the break-ins and the dolls? The constables looked at one another. We asked about that. He says it's possible, perhaps even likely, given your trauma, that you took those dolls from evidence. That's where they were after your last discovery. You had access and a reason to dwell on them.
A reason?
They were choosing their words carefully. What about the intruder? He's a local, an addict, really ill. He's been arrested for breaking into cottages before. He usually does it to empty ones. You just moved to Oxbow. Even with lights on and the vehicle out front, he probably didn't understand it was occupied. You surprised him.
I surprised him?
I said incredulously. After more protests, I was released and told to be grateful. An investigation would follow, of course, but no charges laid unless something more incriminating was found. It won't be, I said bitterly. The constable walked me out of the Huntsville station, shaking his head and walking away. Man doesn't know how lucky he is. Before I could object, the door shut. I packed my stuff and raced home. I didn't have my gun, of course, but I figured he wouldn't be armed at his office. If he was, it'd be with a knife. In a fair fight, I'd take it and cut his damn head off. Ignoring the protests of his secretary and the man seated in the treatment room, I found him. He appeared alarmed, scared. What's the matter? What? Didn't expect to see me again? I moved closer to his desk and he stood up, backing away to the large window. We were on the 5th floor of the building. Where are they? Who? I braced my foot against the desk and pushed it slowly until his legs were trapped against the sill. Olive and Matthew. I don't, he yelped when I pushed harder. I swear, the police in Huntsville, they called. I understand something happened up there, but I can assure you, you died in the hospital right in front of me. He looked to the other man in the room, his patient. I didn't even visit you in the hospital. I'm clearly not dead. Your PTSD must have caused a psychotic break and... Liar! We argued more, but the BVLP showed up and I was strongly encouraged to leave, which I did. I refrained from telling him this isn't over, because then I'd be arrested. He already knew. He was counting on it. I went home next and tried to talk to my wife and family. He'd called them first and told them to be careful, told them to call the police if I started behaving erratically. My story, of course, fell into that category. You can't stay here, my wife said, and it hurt to know that she wouldn't believe me, and never could. I left without argument. He found me later in the park that night. The nervous demeanor had been left behind for his patients and the rest of the world. He lit a cigarette and asked if I wanted one. You son of a bitch, I said. He exhaled a plume into the air. So now you understand. How I'm about to kill you? Sure. I had nothing to lose. They're dead if I am, he said, completely calm. Seems like I'd be doing them a favor. He pulled a small pistol out of his coat. No one would be surprised if I carried this and shot a crazed attacker. What do you want? I had nothing left to give him anymore. No one gets away. They have to know. So, you gonna kill me? Eventually, yes. I will come and we'll finish what we started. They'll knock in the night and you'll answer the door, let them in, and offer them food. Which they won't eat. He nodded. Because they're dolls. If they're not by then it'll be over. I'll find others, but I think they'll do fine. Tell me why you're doing this. I'm as good as dead anyway. He held his cigarette in clenched teeth, and then he smiled. You'd be shocked how much one will pay for a doll of mine. Quite shocked indeed. That's not why you do this, I said. Not enough of me remained to shed a tear. I felt hollow, dead already. I couldn't be shocked anymore. When they knocked, I would open the door. I'd try to help them, though it seemed futile, and failure was almost assured. He backed away until confident that I wouldn't follow. I stayed in the park the rest of the night, but moved into the motel where I currently live the next day. Now I wait. I'm typing this out and putting it out there, so maybe when I'm gone, when I'm headless, someone will look for those poor kids and give them something to eat. That's my last low hope, at least. Such a good story. I always like listening to that one. It's definitely one of my favorites from most recently. So, from not feeding dolls, straight into a little doll party. This one is brought to us by Dark Slayer 77. It's an oldie but a goodie, so I hope you enjoy it. The Humvee's brakes squealed as the driver downshifted to take a sharp right. Then we came to a stop. "All right, gents, you know the drill," Sergeant Stafford yelled out. This was the 19th house search we'd had today, and quite frankly, we were all getting sick of it. My boots hit the sand, and I slung my rifle over, getting a good grip on it. An exhalation of exhaustion and boredom was heard from all the guys as we approached the door. "You think we'll catch this one red-handed, Ellis?" Ray grinned at me. "Oh yeah, pants around his ankles and all. God, I felt embarrassed for that guy." We stacked up for our routine formation at the door. Corporal Martinez approached the front, lowering his rifle. He took a quick charge up and punted the door wide open. "Move, move, move!" I swung around the right corner, scanning the area, and I had Ray on my rear checking the front. It was a kitchen area. Busted cupboards, disgusting-looking tiles. The whole place reeked of old carpet and mold. I felt Ray's hand on my rig, indicating for me to press on. I rushed forward in a controlled manner and felt the 6 pairs of footsteps trailing behind me. The living room was clear, and we headed for the stairs, located at the far left. I heard some rummaging upstairs, so I indicated to Sergeant Stafford in the rear to swap me out. I quickly rushed along the right side of the column, swapping with Private Ashford, who carried the team's big-ass shotgun. Ashford excitedly raised his weapon, waiting for the tap. I was now in the 4th position, carefully threading into the stack. My eyes were constantly darting left and right, looking for the open back door or window or what have you. We started moving up the stairs, hugging the wall tightly. Reaching the turn in the staircase, Ashford confidently swung the corner. Having a little visibility over Mendez's shoulder, I saw him freeze. His face turned pale in a matter of seconds, the clacking of his rifle sling indicating his violent shaking. Ashford moved to the fore, 6 shots fired in the direction of something upstairs. Contact! Private Watford swung around Ashford to provide greater suppression fire and move up the stairs to unclog the stack. An ear-piercing sound came from upstairs, the chaos ensuring the formation was disoriented, along with the noise, and I began to feel nauseous. Grabbing Martinez's collar, I tugged him down the stairs to free the staircase for engagement. As we were moving down the stairs, I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a woman, entirely covered in bullet holes, dashing towards Ashford. Click, click, click. His gun ran dry, and it was already too late. The hellish creature, dripping blood and having a few pieces of meat barely holding its limbs together, closed the distance between him and snapped his neck with an inhuman amount of force. A magazine dumped by Watford led him to the same fate. Having it turned towards us, I caught some details of what it looked like. Its face was hollow, cheeks sunken in, eye sockets empty. Saying it was pale would be an understatement. Freakishly skinny and tall, completely destroyed by bullet holes. Its nails were probably the size of half a knife. Our whimpers and curses were muffled by the sound of the automatic fire and ejecting magazines. It was not phased. "Get down!" The familiar sound of a grenade being ejected from the grenade launcher tube echoed from behind me. I dove to the left, managing to pull Martinez down just in time, and an explosion followed. Then it was just darkness. My ears were ringing, face full of dust. Aching pain in my left leg stuck as I attempted to get up. I slowly opened my eyes, glaring at the flickering light from the ceiling. I glanced to my right, but Martinez wasn't there. That's when I spotted all the bodies. Sergeant Stafford, Corporal Smith, PFC Arethus. I whimpered in fear as I dragged my ass towards the wall, breathing heavily. I felt my rifle under my right hand and gripped it tight. Another detailed look towards the deceased, and I spotted Martinez too. Hunched over on a chair, head hung backwards, throat slashed open. Ray. I didn't see Ray anywhere. I had to find him. I pulled myself up, nearly collapsing. A quick glance down towards my knee revealed the issue. A huge piece of debris had lodged itself in there. I pulled it out, letting out a groan and a few quick breaths. Dragging that leg behind and pushing myself off the wall, I started moving upstairs. Ray! Where are you, man? I turned the corner of the stairs and realized why Ashford froze. The upstairs area was a large living room. In there, neatly arranged, were about 14 to 15 chairs. Sitting in them with perfect posture were corpses. The corpses of recon squads that went missing earlier today. In the farthest chair to the right, I spotted Ray. He was alive. I started making my way up the stairs, and I saw his eyes widen and his lips attempt to say something. I'm coming, man. Just hold on. Ellis, on the ceiling. My blood ran cold and my eyes widened. In a split second, my heart rate doubled, and I was clenching my jaw so hard I could have easily broken it. Slowly, raising my glance and rifle towards the ceiling, I saw it. Head slightly tilted to the right, hanging onto the ceiling with those ridiculously long legs. Its thinning hair hung down, drenched in blood, inches from my face. It let out a sickening gurgle or a groan before striking at me. I woke up in one of those chairs. I glanced to my left and noticed Ray wasn't there. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the next room. I dove out the window and crawled away, giving it a quick glance backwards. It was staring at me, its hollow face replicating what would have been a smile on a human. Its arms moved up, raising something. I caught a glance of a familiar blonde head. Ray, I'm so sorry, man. This next one's always a lot of fun to do. I wish I had really gotten in on the Disney horror story craze, but this one's really about my only entry. Might have to go back and read some classics, I don't know, but this one's definitely a goodie. Brought to us by our good friend, J Group. This is Disney's Dark Secret. Teddy and I had been working at Disney for years. The two of us had seen hundreds, if not thousands, of young cast members come and go, heading off to college or to better jobs and brighter futures. Meanwhile, the two of us stuck around and became a running joke to some of the younger employees, since we were never promoted to management, that is. Most of the lower-level members were young, in their early 20s or late teens, and to them, it was just a part-time gig, a way to raise money for college or to pass a bit of time until their real lives and careers began. But Teddy and I were lifers, and some would say losers, although I would never attach that label to myself willingly. I'd heard it whispered enough times to know that it was what other people thought of us. We'd both been there for nearly 2 decades, and had worked on pretty much every single attraction, but had never been deemed responsible enough to be promoted to supervisor status. Over all that time, I found a lot of secrets about the place. Some things that are known to the public, but also some revelations that aren't talked about anywhere. Did you know that cast members who work as mascots have to wear communal underwear? Yeah, that's right. They all share the same underoos, and they get washed in between uses. At least, in theory. Who knows what pervert came up with that idea? Or how about the fact the skeleton on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride was originally constructed out of real bones? Despite the park's insistence that all the bones were removed, a few still remain. Management lost track of which were real and which were fake, and they just left the real ones in there along with the imposters. But when you're up close, it's easy to tell them apart. The real ones are a little more yellow, and they're heavier than the plaster ones. There are plenty of morbid secrets like that. People scatter the ashes of their deceased loved ones in the park so frequently, we actually have a not-so-subtle code name for it. A white powder alert. The Haunted Mansion and the Pirates of the Caribbean are the most common places, but it's done all over, and who knows how often people get away with it without even being noticed. Code 101 means a ride is temporarily shut down, while Code V, or a protein spill, means that someone has vomited on a ride and it needs to be cleaned up. Those spills are often the cause of ride shutdowns, rather than mechanical issues. Oh, and if you hear yourself or someone else being referred to as a treasured guest, it doesn't mean you're a VIP. It's actually our code word for saying you're being an asshole. There are stories of ghosts, some told by people who never believed in such things before witnessing them in the park. The specter of Walt Disney himself has been seen a couple of times, outside Sleeping Beauty's castle, just on the other side of the drawbridge. Or sometimes he's seen at night, just outside his old apartment on Main Street, where occasionally you might smell a whiff of cigarette smoke, despite the fact that such things are banned inside the park. Walt and his family once lived there, so they could spy on visitors and listen to their opinion on the park. They would eavesdrop on their conversations from the second-floor apartment, just above the street level. George, a dead electrician, supposedly haunts the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and every morning, cast members must call out, "Good morning, George," at the start of the day. Otherwise, the ride will mysteriously have issues all day long. Unexpected shutdowns and other strange things often occur if George isn't given his proper morning greeting. And have you heard about the animatronics in It's a Small World running all night long? Yep, those rumors are true too. In fact, quite a few of the lifelike robots stay in motion 24/7, even throughout the lockdown and park shutdowns a couple of years back. If you ask the management about it, they'll tell you it's because the attractions are cheaper to maintain that way. They break down less frequently if they're in constant motion. That's the excuse we get anyway. But I've come to realize there might be far more terrifying reasons for this. Something so disturbing and twisted that I wouldn't have thought it was possible if I hadn't witnessed it for myself. Teddy and I were on our lunch break when we found the storage room. We were looking for somewhere a little more private since Teddy had brought a bit of homemade greenery and his favorite piece of glassware that day. The park has miles and miles of tunnels crisscrossing beneath it, and Teddy and I had explored most of the labyrinth over our years of service. Like everything else in the park, there was a stupid nickname for these underground tunnels. They had been dubbed utilidors by some management types in the distant past. Most of the cast members just called them the tunnels, and they were so vast we often used golf carts to get from one end of them to the other. There were odd dead ends at some of the tunnels that seemed to intentionally lead to nowhere. We were currently in one such useless utilidor when we noticed an odd-looking door which appeared to be at least half a century old, if not more. It had a rusted placard hanging over its surface which read, "Obsolete animatronic storage." "Hey, didn't there used to be a vending machine there?" Teddy asked. "Who cares? Let's see if it opens. We've only got 20 minutes left," I said, looking at the time on my cell phone. The doorknob turned in my hand, and the two of us went inside. I looked for a light switch on the wall to my right, but I didn't find one. It was pitch black and impossible to see anything. Using the flashlight on my phone, I cast a beam of light around the room, trying to see what kind of space we were in. There were people-shaped forms all around us, draped in tarps and tablecloths. The room was as long as a football field, but it was narrow, only about 15 feet across. "Creepy," Teddy said, taking the words right out of my mouth. Well, I guess it did say this was animatronic storage. This must be really old. He wandered away from the door, and it clicked shut behind him. Something about that made me nervous, but I had ignored the feeling. The door had been unlocked, and that meant we'd be able to get out again. Still, I reached for the knob to check it. My hand was about to touch the polished brass when Teddy called out, making me jump. "Whoa! Check this out!" he said, sounding excited. I left the door, turning around to see what he was looking at. He had his cell phone light on as well, and was lifting up one of the tarps to look at what was underneath. "Man, this thing's freaky looking." He pulled the tarp away, and I saw what he meant. The thing hidden beneath was very creepy. It had the goateed face of a young man, but the ears and nubby horns of a goat, looking far too real. Its lower half looked like it also belonged to a goat. The thing reminded me of a satyr, those drunken, lustful half-goat gods from Greek mythology. I tried to figure out why it was making me feel so uneasy, and realized it was the eyes. They were too lifelike, far more real than the animatronics out in the park. And the look of the skin, the way it reflected the light and anything about it, it looked like it was a real creature. More likely, a man had been sewn to the body of a goat in a very thorough way, making the seams blend together perfectly. Teddy was already moving on to the next one, looking under another tarp. He left me alone with this one, and I looked back down at it as I let go of the cover and let it fall across its face again. Flinching backwards, I nearly screamed, as I could have sworn the eyes of the thing were looking at me, just as I dropped the tarp over its face. My heart was beating fast, and I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, or that the eyes had been looking up that way the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. "We need to go," I heard myself say, but Teddy wasn't listening. "Holy crap, this one's even more jacked up. Dude, you gotta check this out." I opened my mouth to say, "No, let's get out of here," but my words caught in my throat. The satyr creature under the tarp was clearly moving now. Its head was still draped in the plastic sheet, but I could see it turning to look at me, as if its gaze could penetrate through the tarp. "Dude, come check this out," Teddy was yelling, pulling the next sheet off and dropping it to the floor. I saw what he was referring to, my eyes drawn to it despite the terror of the draped creature just in front of me. This one was tall, standing nearly 10 feet. It had one large eye instead of two. Man, whoever made these things was tripping on acid or something. Look at this thing. It looks like they jacked an eye from an elephant and stuffed it in some dude's forehead. I think they were trying to make a cyclops. I could barely hear him, as now the thing in front of me wasn't the only figure in the room which was moving. To my left, the entire row of covered forms were beginning to stretch and turn as they woke up from whatever sleep they had been in. Some were tall, some were short, like the satyr thing on my right, but all of them were alive. I realized it was very cold all of a sudden, and realized I could see my breath steaming out in the air. A compressor groaned to life, and I saw a nearby vent cough out a frosty plume as if something had been jammed or broken and was suddenly operating again. The temperature in the room began to plummet, and a second later I was freezing cold, the rushing air chilling the back of my neck. Finally, I was shocked out of my stupor and managed to get a word out. "Teddy," I croaked, but too late. The giant cyclops hand shot out and grabbed my friend by the throat. It lifted him up into the air while his legs kicked and his arms thrashed, trying to break its grip. He was choking and sputtering, flailing madly as he tried to free himself. The cyclops firmly held him by the throat, and I heard the sound of cartilage and bones being crushed. His spine popped, and his head bent back at an impossible angle, his skull lolling backwards like a broken Pez dispenser. And then the giant dropped him to the concrete floor of the room, and his phone clattered and turned over, casting half the room in darkness again. I backed away, feeling like I was moving in slow motion, but unable to go any quicker. Reaching back for the doorknob, it felt like the tunnel had grown by 100 feet. It was further away than it could possibly have ever been. I kept backing up, taking slow, quiet steps. The figures were moving towards me, all of them closing the gap and slowly walking in my direction. Their forms were covered, draped in bed sheets and tarps and tablecloths, as if this place had been thrown together in a hurry, hastily constructed to house these possessed animatronics or whatever these creatures were. Cold air was filling the room, making it even more difficult to move. My skin felt like it was being stabbed with pins and needles, the freezing wind going right through my summer clothes. There was a sound of tearing flesh and blood being spilled. I looked to see several of the monsters were tearing the skin from Teddy's face, peeling it from his bones with some difficulty, like trying to open an underripe orange. The worst part was, it looked like he was still alive. He was opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, his eyes wide open as if he'd be screaming if he were capable of it. I tried to tear my eyes away from it, but I couldn't. I found myself staring at him as they took the flesh off his face. I backed up hard into something and realized it was the door. In the darkness, I felt for the doorknob behind me, but I couldn't find it. The creatures were still moving towards me, all of their faces covered by sheets except for the massive cyclops that had killed my friend. Its one huge eye was fixed on me, and as it moved in lockstep with the other creatures, they all seemed to share one hive mind. As they approached, a few stepped on each other's coverings, tearing them away and revealing their hideous faces. I saw a woman's upper body sewn onto the legs of a deer, and a man with the hindquarters of a bull, their faces full of mute anger. My hand groped for the doorknob desperately, and after several long moments, it settled on the smooth brass. It was so cold, almost frozen. I spun around, expecting the doorknob to turn easily, but this time it was stuck. I couldn't tell if it was locked or frozen solid, but either way it wouldn't budge. Feeling like there would be icy hands around my throat at any second, I was too terrified to turn around. I heard the sound of shuffling feet moving closer, the icy wind blowing through my clothes and raising goosebumps on my skin. I began pounding against the door with my fists, banging on it as hard as I could as I screamed for help, pleading for someone to save me. "Help! Help! Open the door!" I yelled at the top of my lungs. The corridor we had entered was a dead end, rarely used by anyone. Of course, this door would be locked from the inside, I thought to myself. Who would offer an escape to these animatronic demons? If they had ever been imbued with any form of failsafe, it was long ago out of commission and useless. These creatures had no mercy and no respect for human life. They wanted blood and flesh and meat to create more of themselves, to raise an army of undead robotic soldiers. Manic thoughts were racing through my head as I tried to think of another way out. There had to be something, some other way out. I turned around, hoping for some other exit to present itself, but instead I just saw hundreds of shrouded forms stepping closer and closer until they were just a few feet away. A gurgling, wheezing sound could be heard from behind them, and I realized it was the labored breathing of Teddy slowly dying. If I didn't get out of here, I'd be next. With one desperate move, I kicked out towards the head of the nearest shrouded figure. It was the satyr. My foot connected with his face, and as it did, the entire crowd fell back a step, as if hurting one of them would hurt all of them. I lashed out with another blow, punching it in the gut, and the crowd took another wounded step backward. I used the newfound space to my advantage and took a short running start towards the door. Kicking it hard with my boot, I connected squarely with the spot behind the doorknob. It rattled in the frame, but it didn't budge. Taking a quick look back over my shoulder, I saw the crowd of animatronic creatures were coming at me again with renewed anger. They looked furious at me for assaulting one of them, and apparently I had injured it. The satyr was slumped forward, its joints making creaky noises as it made its way towards me, its movements jerky and disorganized. I kicked the door again, harder this time, using every ounce of force I could muster. I heard something splinter and break, but it still wouldn't budge. Icy hands grabbed my throat from behind, and I threw an elbow backward to try to break free. It connected with whatever had grabbed me, and it didn't let go. Instead, its grip tightened, choking and squeezing my throat until I couldn't breathe. I let out another strangled cry for help, but no sound came out this time. The grip on my windpipe was making it impossible to call out. My feet were going numb from the cold, which seemed to have intensified even more somehow. I hadn't thought it was possible to feel any colder, but I realized that whoever was controlling the temperature of this place was doing this on purpose. These things didn't like the cold, and it put them in a state of hibernation. For some reason, this place had been almost room temperature when we entered, bringing these creatures back to life. With one more desperate effort, I lifted my leg and kicked as hard as I could, my heel connecting with the door just beside the latch. Something shattered and broke loudly, and the door swung open on its hinges. The momentum brought me forward, and I found myself tumbling back into the corridor. Whatever had grabbed hold of me came with me, the icy hand still around my neck. As I landed, the thing's fingers broke off like icicles, shattering on impact. The shrouded creature was writhing on the floor, looking as if it wanted to get up and chase me, but wasn't quite capable of it yet. It was still too cold. I stumbled to my feet and ran from there, not really thinking about my mistake until I was far past that point. When it occurred to me what I had done, it was too late. I had let those things out. I'd opened the door and freed them, and I had allowed the warm air inside so they could come back to life and escape. I was too terrified to stay in the park. I went home immediately without saying a word to anyone, then called my boss and told him I was sick with a stomach flu. I apologized, saying I'd been throwing up in the bathroom and didn't want to cause a code V while on stage. He told me that was okay, since he knew I was a dedicated employee, a trusted cast member who had been with the park for years. But he did ask if I'd seen Teddy, and I had to lie and tell him I hadn't. I'm supposed to go back to work tomorrow, for the first time since all of this happened. The worst part about it, nobody has reported Teddy missing. His family hadn't called to say anything either. It's almost like none of it ever happened. Except I've got the marks around my neck, the bruises that prove I didn't imagine it. I just got a strange message from Teddy on his cell phone. He says, "See you at work tomorrow, buddy," accompanied by a mouse emoji. Me and some of the cast members have a big surprise for you. One last story for you, and this one is definitely a doozy. Brought to us by Horror Writer 1717. It's Dear John, one of my few forays into reading zombie fiction. So, I hope you enjoy. My name is unimportant, but what I do is. I'm a member of an elite unit you'll never hear of. We contain incidences of all kinds. Not only do we deal with physical issues, but we also keep the information from the public. It's better that way. It keeps people from panicking and helps maintain order. I found a notebook on my last mission. Even though it violates the rules, I owe it to the author to tell his story. I know it'll be written off as a conspiracy theory or some crackpot Reddit post, so there's no real danger. At least, I don't think there is. It reads as follows. Here I sit in this moldy, godforsaken cell, awaiting my unfair death sentence to be carried out. I can't stand my neighbors. They're noisy and they stink. It's my own fault, though. If I hadn't been responsible and tried to help, I wouldn't be here right now. Ironically, doing the right thing has doomed me. It all started a long time ago, in a golden age that I like to call last week. Good morning, Miss Watner. You're looking as lovely as ever. For someone who looks so old that even a mummy would turn tail and run. Why, Jonathan, aren't you sweet? Thank you, ma'am. Will that be paper or plastic? Paper, of course. We can always grow more trees, can't we? Yes, ma'am. Maybe one day soon we'll use one to make you a nice coffin. The old crone drifted away, flashing her huge diamond ring and mink coat. I never understood why she bothered to come to the grocery store, when she could always have her servants do it for her. Then it hit me. This was her way of staying in touch with the commoners, of proving to herself that she was still human. I can't blame her too much, I guess. If I was obscenely rich, I'd want to flaunt it too. Uh-oh. Looks like Mr. Burgess is heading towards Jane's register. I'd better go help. Jane, you have an urgent phone call in the office. I'll cover for you. A wave of relief washes over her, as panic had started to flood her face. Thank you, she whispered, touching my shoulder and sending warmth through me. Humph, Mr. Burgess mumbled, leering at her as she went. Take away the only good part of my day. Good morning, Mr. Burgess. Are you having a party? I asked, as a dozen cans of Sterno rolled down the belt, followed by 10 boxes of matches and 5 cases of bottled water. Never mind what I'm doing, he growled. Oof, I struggled to stay upright from the stench of alcohol that wafted from his mouth. Yes, sir. That'll be $157.32, please. He grumbled something that I couldn't make out as his gnarled fingers reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 brand-new $100 bills. I handed him back his change. "You have a nice day now." He shot me a look of scorn mixed with pity, a look I would have expected to see a hunter give to wounded prey. "Humph," was all he said as he scuttled out through the door. As I watched him go with the same look of scorn and pity, a man stumbled in. He wasn't remarkable in any way, but something told me to keep an eye on him. He was of average height and size, but he shuffled instead of walked. The look in his eyes was vacant, as if the lights were on, but no one was home. He shuffled past me just as Jane returned to her register. She shot me a look of gratitude with just a hint of affection, but I was too focused to acknowledge it. As if mesmerized, I drifted behind him, trying to remain inconspicuous as he slowly made his way to the pharmacy section. I turned the corner, and there he stood, swaying back and forth as though driven by a non-existent breeze. I approached him. "Can I help you, sir?" As he turned towards me, I could see scratches on his neck and a hint of dried blood under his jacket. He stared at me with those empty eyes. Instinctually, my hand slipped behind my back and grasped the handle of my knife, something I carried for just such an occasion. I set my feet and prepared for him to lunge at me. This is it, I thought. 12 years of working at this menial job have finally paid off. I'm in the right place at the right time to stop the outbreak. I just need to be sure, or I'll spend the next 20 somewhere much worse. I pulled the knife out just an inch when he cleared his throat. "Sorry, it's my wife. She isn't feeling well." I slid the knife back into my sheath and said, "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can help you find?" His vacant eyes drifted back to the shelf. He picked up a bottle of Midol and a pack of tampons. "These should do it." He tried to force a smile and shuffled past me towards the checkout. Something was still nagging at me about him. I went back to my register and bagged groceries while he waited in line. When he shuffled towards the front door, I mumbled something about needing carts and followed him outside. He had parked his car at the edge of the lot, but even partway there, I could see the car he was heading for was rocking back and forth and sounded like someone was pounding from inside. As I approached, I saw blood smeared all over the window and the face of a large woman pressed against the glass. I was 30 feet away when he reached the car and unlocked the door. "Don't!" I screamed, reaching for the knife, but he'd already pulled the door handle. She exploded out of the car and launched herself at him. He fell backwards, and she began devouring him like a starving lion on its prey. She clawed at him and ripped out his throat with her teeth, making a geyser of blood. He tried to cry out, but all that came out was a bloody gurgle. I shook off the shock of the pure, stark reality of the situation and took advantage of my opening. I held my knife over my head, closed my eyes, and swung as hard as I could. I missed the first try and only managed to slice off her ear. Needless to say, that got her attention. She ceased gouging at him and turned towards me. Crap! I tried to ready myself in a defensive stance, but she lunged at me, growling. I held the knife in front of me, and she impaled herself on it. Unfortunately, it sunk into her neck. The force of her impact knocked me onto my back. I nearly lost consciousness when my head bounced off the pavement. My vision swam as she snapped her bloody teeth at me. I held her at bay with the knife that was still lodged in her throat, the same knife I would need to kill her. After a quick moment's thought and a frantic plan, I shoved my forearm into her chest and yanked the knife free. I lost ground in the process and felt her teeth scrape my nose as I swung the knife around and buried it in her ear. It looked like a movie in pause. She stopped with her mouth frozen open, then slowly rolled off of me. I sat up as best I could, stared down at her, pulling my knife out, and then I shoved it in his ear, just to be sure. "Freeze!" came a loud voice from behind me. I turned to see 3 police cars with their lights flashing. 6 officers, all pointing their guns at me. "Drop the knife, get on your knees, lace your fingers behind your head," the officer said. "Are you kidding me? I just saved everyone," I said incredulously. "Do it now or we will shoot you." The knife clattered to the ground as I did as I was told. In a heartbeat, I was cuffed and stuffed, riding towards the station in the back of the police car. "Third-degree murder? Are you nuts?" I yelled at the attorney seated across the table from me. "That's the best I can do. You brutally murdered 2 people in broad daylight in front of a dozen witnesses." "They weren't people anymore." "Let me guess, you thought they were—" "Yes, I did, and they were." He threw his papers into his briefcase and started towards the door. "I'll register an insanity plea if you want me to." "I'm not insane. You have to listen to me. We can stop it. Find out who those people were and where they were coming from. The police in that town need to be alerted." He rolled his eyes. "I already know who they were and where they were from. Michael and Sara Weston. They lived right here in Frost Creek. They both worked at the hospital. She was a nurse and he worked in maintenance." I slumped in my chair. It's over. There's no way I can stop it if it started in town. The guards took me back to my cell, where I sat in quiet desperation, trying to decide what to do next. I took the tablet and the pencil I'd been given when I was booked, and started writing this as a bit of a history. Right now, it's just so I can keep the events straight in my own head. I'm calling it Dear John, a letter to the undead. By the time I'm done writing this, there won't be anyone left alive to read it. It only started yesterday, back when my life was uncomplicated and boring. When I was done writing, my wrist hurt. Logging down the demise of humanity will do that. I tried to warn the officers when they would pass my cell at mealtime. It became a litany. Is there anything strange going on in town? Do you have enough food, water, and ammo at home? Is your family someplace where you can protect them? My concern was met with scorn and even alarm. I guess they felt threatened by my questions. I don't know why. After a while, the officers came through less and less. That was when it happened. My cell window looked out towards a truck stop. I was lying on my bunk when I felt as much as heard the explosion. I jumped up and stared in shock as the tanker truck was up in flames, sending black smoke pouring into the air. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and still no fire trucks had arrived. With little wind, the smoke had settled at street level, making visibility near zero. An hour later, the wind picked up and blew away the haze just enough to see the sun riding low on the horizon. That's when I saw them. They were shambling through the haze, unfocused with no direction. They just came. I watched with a helpless detachment, knowing that there was nothing I could do about it. I heard the first gunshot a few minutes later. They shambled into the cell block, 2 and 3 at a time. It didn't take long for the smell of rotting flesh to surround my cell, reaching through the bars like groupies at a rock concert. Thank God there was a wall behind me. I watched in hopeless fascination as the inmates in the cell next to me got too close to the bars and were torn apart. So here I sit, the putrid scent of death and decay overwhelming me, but no more than the knowledge that I could have stopped this, or at least warned people if I hadn't been arrested. The least I can do is write this letter to whoever might be left alive to read it. So maybe they know how this whole thing began, and it might help them in some small way. Day 2. I can honestly say that this is the first time I've ever entertained the thought of drinking out of the toilet. Thirst is driving me mad, though, and the sink is unfortunately located next to the bars. My guests have not gotten bored and moved on like I thought they would. If anything, they seem to have doubled in numbers. On the plus side, all the growling and jostling kept me awake so that I wouldn't have to worry about being grabbed in my sleep. No, I can be sure I'll be awake and alert so that I feel every set of teeth as I'm slowly devoured. It's always good to think positively. One of the deputies has made his way to the front of the cell. The keys to the cell dangle tantalizingly from his belt. I'm hypnotized by them. I could go insane just thinking about the possibilities. But the fact of the matter is, I know I'd be dead before I shove the key in the lock. It does make me smile, though, knowing that the walking dead are too brainless to realize that they literally hold the keys to my demise. Day 3. I did it. I'm not proud of it, but the overwhelming thirst drove me to it. Unfortunately, there's not much left in the bowl. I flushed to see if the water level would rise again, but it didn't. I've kept the bowl clear of contamination, though. I have taken some small measure of revenge against my future killers by relieving myself in their open mouths. I've become a fairly accurate shot, too. I stand just out of reach and then fire away. They do draw back from it, but I don't really know why. I'm sure it doesn't even register in their dead brains. It's still strange, though. The ones that I hit don't return. Day 4. I can't stand the relentless, overwhelming, crushing thought that I'm powerless, that at some point I'll succumb. I'm gonna try to grab the keys. I don't know what I'll do from there. but it's clear that help isn't coming. If I want to survive, I'll have to do it on my own. Day 5. This will be my last entry. I can't believe what a fool I was. Even though I was able to grab the keys, I paid for it dearly. 2 of them got a hold of my arm and bit right through it. I wrenched away with all my strength, screaming in sheer agony as my injured arm ripped away from my body, leaving them with a snack and me with a bloody stump. I'm bleeding as I write this. I haven't even tried to stop it. I'd rather die this way than be ripped to pieces by those creatures. At least it's on my terms, not theirs. If someone finds this, I hope that something in these pages will be of some help. I only wish it could be more. Maybe by keeping these creatures distracted here, someone else is having a fighting chance to escape. I hope so. Goodbye. I destroyed the notebook. Standard procedure. Contain the threat, contain the information. That's what we do. It was a big deal locally, but we were able to keep it out of the national news. We told the public there was a toxic gas leak that made people sick, but that it was being contained. The explosion at the gas station was covered as a random accident. It did help us with cleanup, though. Nothing like a giant fire to throw all the undead bodies on. I salute the unfortunate soul for his brave sacrifice. I just wish we'd been called in sooner. We might have been able to save him.
And just like that, we're gonna wrap it up for another day. But I do hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Cozy Horror with yours truly, Dr. Plague, and I hope we'll see you again sometime. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful day and a spooky evening.